Oh, no, that's cool. We're going to go ahead and get started. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly on American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA Round 2 Distribution Planning. It is Friday, May 13, 2022. We are noticed from 12 to 2 p.m. today. Documents are available online at muni.org. Click on Assembly, and at the top, click on Work Sessions and scroll to this session, and you can find them there. We'll go ahead and start with introductions around the table here, starting with Mr. Perez-Verdia.
I'm just saying my name, Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Felix Rivera.
Introduction. So it all started 52 years ago. No, Randy Salt here.
Jamie Allard.
Kevin Cross.
Pete Peterson.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Shelley Roughton.
Claire Ross, Legislative Liaison.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
And we also have Desiree Camacho here from the clerk's office. Do we have any members online? On the phone?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here. This is Forrest Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. And I see we also have Ms. Erickson from the mayor's office as well. Thank you all for being here today. I have to remind myself not to say introductions, I think. It's just our protocol, right, for identifying ourselves for the record. Though, Mr. Salt, I'm sure that would have been really interesting to hear your story. So there are agendas on the table there and posted online. And we have two goals for today's work session. And the first is to determine the process for which proposals will be considered at the May 26 work session, and then also determine the proposal selection process that we'll use at the May 26 work session. But before we move on with taking up these goals, I want to call attention to the handout, the Anchorage Assembly ARPA Round 2 Distribution Framework, and it includes the vision. I will just go ahead and read through this and summarize the priorities and the guiding principles. Again, these documents are available online at muni.org. Click on Assembly. Vision. And thank you to Mr. Rivera for your assistance in this. The Anchorage Assembly recognizes that this one-time funding through the American Recovery Plan Act, ARPA, must be wisely spent to allow it to do as much good in our community as possible. To achieve this goal, the Assembly envisions funding projects which focus on economic resilience, will increase our competitiveness as a destination city, and make all parts of our city vibrant and welcoming. Successful proposals should provide long-term investments and be transparent and equitable. projects should be aligned as much as possible with the Assembly's ARPA priorities, child and family support, housing, economic development, and a healthy workforce. In addition, proposals should speak to the Assembly's approved 2022 goals and priorities. And those funding priorities, which we determined at our prior work session, again include child and family support, housing, economic development, including community investment and downtown development, and a healthy workforce. The guiding principles, we have 6 identified: need, aid populations that need it the most and address current and unique challenges, including COVID-19 impact and inflation. Geography, have a fair and positive impact across the municipality. Alignment, leverage other opportunities and address resource gaps. Feasibility, consider the financial resources and timing needed for implementation success. Informed, consider the most recent data, public input, and where possible, best practices. And finally, equity, address current historical and geographical inequities in our systems that have been illuminated by COVID-19. And we came up with this framework, or actually we revisited the framework that was created for the CARES Act funds distribution and use for the first tranche of ARPA funds and revised it. So we'll go ahead then and move into a discussion and review and then discussion of eligible uses, which will be led by Shelley Roughton from Assembly Council.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go through this very quickly. Claire threatened me if I went over. She'd never let me present again. So there's a lot to cover. So I'm just going to hit the high points. We'll provide you with this later. And I know that Claire's already given you a whole lot of information. So there's 4 statutory categories, which I think you know: public health emergency response, premium pay, revenue reduction, and then water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Those are split into 7 expenditure categories, which I'm going to fly through and just hit a couple on each. Public health, there's all kinds of things: enhanced behavioral health services in schools, prevention, outpatient treatment, inpatient treatment, opioid use reduction, those kinds of things, in addition to the regular COVID-19 care that we saw before. Here's where we get into the ones that we'll probably find a lot of interest in: negative economic impacts and services to disproportionately impacted communities. We can get into things like reemployment and job training, affordable housing development, permanent supportive housing, childcare, early learning, addressing the learning loss that we've seen in students, rehabilitation of commercial properties, technical assistance, business incubators, startup grants or expansion costs for small businesses, health disparities that could include community health workers, health facilities, educational disparities, meaning enhanced fundings to high poverty schools or facilities in certain neighborhoods. And there are standards listed in the guidance for all of these different neighborhoods. Improvements to vacant and abandoned property. Premium pay, this would have to come based on information from HR, and you can actually have this be retroactive. I don't know that we had any premium pay given out in the past couple of years, but it can be retroactive if we did. These would have to be workers performing essential work, which meant regular in-person interactions, or they regularly handled items handled by others. Couldn't be people who perform telework, couldn't be individual or volunteers. Infrastructure, sewer and water, which we saw a lot of on the mayor's proposal. Just to make this easy, if it's eligible under EPA Clean Water Revolving Fund or the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, it's eligible. Things that could be really interesting to look at would be testing and compliance for water quality, childcare facilities, residential wells. I know we have a lot of stuff on the hillside that is of concern. Culvert repair. Of course, we also have to ask these questions as we go through these projects. Can we get this money elsewhere easily? Grants, EPA, bonds, those kinds of things. Broadband infrastructure, probably not that relevant for us because we do have access to those quick upload, download speeds. Revenue replacement. I'm actually going to ask Mr. Bockenstedt. I see him here. Would you mind coming up here and saying a couple of words about revenue replacement and how it may have changed from the previous? Sure. Thank you.
Well, to the extent that I still know anything about what has happened in the past, my name is, for those that don't know me, I'm Jason Bockenstedt. I was the chief of staff for Mayor Quinn Davidson, and there were quite a few changes, actually, I think in the positive sense, when the final rule from Treasury came out in regards to this. Obviously, on here, they say 5.2% or standard 10 million. I will just say that the standard $10 million is not an option for the municipality at this point, because within the rule that the Treasury Department said is once you pick the way that you want to do it, either by the calculation that they provide or the 10 million, you have to stick with one. And since we did the calculation last year with the first one, they're going to have to do the calculation this year under that one. That being said, that's not actually a bad thing. If you remember back to the document that we, the previous administration sat before the administration, we specifically laid out sections in there that said, these are the projects that we are going to be doing under the lost revenue portion. So we wanted to be very transparent with the public about where those funds are going to be coming from and what they're going to be used for. Again, the three big differences that I think will likely increase that number substantially. And last year, I'll just say, I think the number was about 14.1 million is what the calculation came out to, is to what the municipality could use for lost revenue. Three big things changed in that. One, when we did our calculation, that number was 4.1% add-on year over year from the base year that you did it. So in the final rule, they increased it by 1.1% to 5.2%. So I would anticipate that number being larger. The other two things that are on this spreadsheet is last year we weren't able to include utility revenue or alcohol tax or liquor revenue in that calculation. So again, if the administration wants to do that, my anticipation with that number would be significantly higher than the 14 million. The benefit of that, in my mind, is that as far as I can tell, when you're using those funds, the municipality, the assembly can basically use those for anything that they want, anything that they deem appropriate that this body would like to approve. They can appropriate it for it. So, I always looked at this as kind of a jigsaw puzzle, when you're looking at all of the different areas in which funds can be used or spent, making sure everything fits together. So, the one example that I would use that again, because there was changes in the final rule from last year that you might not need to this year, is we included under the lost revenue portion last year, I think it was probably almost $1 million for technology upgrades at the permit center to, help the permit process out there. Because there wasn't, based on the interim rule, there wasn't any other place that really allowed for that type of funding. That has changed. So for instance, in the final rule under kind of the administrative section, they specifically call out those types of technology upgrades to help the public, help the local government, help the state government provide better service or a more effective service in a whole range of things. So it could be, if there are things that the assembly would like to do over at the Lusac Library to make the process easier for the public to access everything that happens on every other Tuesday night. That's allowable. I know the mayor and the administration included a number of things in terms of technology upgrades and things like that. Those are all outside of their into a separate portion. So again, that's just me kind of saying, think about it from the perspective of making that jigsaw puzzle kind of fit together, and don't necessarily, if you don't have to put everything under the lost revenue section to make it fit, there are other places where you can make that puzzle come together to kind of get a lot of the priorities that you guys would see needed to be funded from this. So I don't know if you wanted anything else.
That
from
is
me, but-
great. I have 23 seconds left.
Okay.
Just kidding. I think that basically covers it. We just need to, when we look at projects, just make sure that we think that they can have their funds obligated by 12/31/24 and expended by 12/31/26. And that's it for me. I was over by a second. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Routen. Actually, if no one objects, I just want to use first names today. Is that okay? All right. Thank you,
Yes.
Shelley.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments regarding eligibility? And did we share the link with members to the Treasury documents?
Yes, they're on the documents for this meeting on the work session page.
Thanks, Claire.
They are. And also, we did not share the total. The administration's proposal was for 47 million. It actually totaled about 45 million. We do have confirmation from the controller's office, or OMB, who clarified with the Treasury that we do have 51 million and change. It's exactly half of the total. And I can get that exact number. I just don't have it pulled up here. So there is $51 million. So
Thank you,
Thank you.
Shelley. And before I go through the queue, and I've got Austin and Jamie, Claire, did you want to add anything at this point? Okay, thank you for putting together the documents. Austin?
Thanks, Suzanne. And thanks to Jason for coming and volunteering to give us that information. He's probably the most knowledgeable person in Anchorage on this issue. So I'm trying to figure it out. So did you say, Jason, that because we didn't take the 10 million standard last time and we used the calculation, we have to do that again? Okay, he's nodding yes. And so the 5.2% is the 5.2% of what? Because 14 million is not 5.2% or 4.1% rather of the total. So can you just talk me through that? Maybe others are quicker than me in getting it, but.
I'm going to have Mr. Bockenstedt come back up and answer that. Jason.
So to answer your question, Austin, the Treasury Department created an entire kind of mathematical equation, and basically you take your base year, your last full fiscal year prior to January 27th, 2020, when the national declaration around COVID-19 happened. So essentially you take, since we go January, December, you take the 2019 municipal budget in terms of, you add up all of the different revenue pieces. Obviously, there are some additional revenue pieces that could be added in this go round. And then you essentially add 5.2% to each year thereafter. So you'd take 2020 and you'd take that 2019 number, you add 5.2%. That would be your number for 2020. Then for 2021, you'd add 5.2%. And then finally for 2022, you'd add another 5.2% on. And that would be the
5.2% of the annual budget?
correct.
Or of what? Okay.
Correct. Based on your base year. And then you essentially take the difference between what your approved budget is in 2022 and whatever that difference is what you're eligible to use as lost revenue.
Okay. Wow, I'm surprised I didn't understand it then. That is more tricky than I thought. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, they lay it out in the final
Okay.
rule, and I would assume that OMB finance or controller would be able to pretty easily calculate that.
Okay, awesome. And I see that someone from OMB and Portia are here. Did you guys want to comment at all on that, or you good? That all sounds right? Okay, great. We're all on the same page. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Austin. Jamie?
Shelley. So I think one of the questions I have is we're talking about being able to disperse funds equally. So one of my concerns is when we did ARPA last time, it was our first time, right? So we're learning a lot from that. And I just want to make sure that when we do it this time, when we disperse the funds, how do we make sure we're dispersing it equally amongst every block of the community? What I mean by that is whether you're homeless, whether you're Black, whether you're Latina, whether you're white, it doesn't matter your demographics. How can we make sure, because the homeless got a lot, they need care, but I also want to make it equal for every block. Do you hear what I'm saying? Okay. I'm trying to like tippy toe without offending anybody. But the bottom line is everybody needs to be treated equally, trying to figure out how we can disperse those funds without shipping 20 million to the homeless, which takes almost half the budget or half the ARPA funds. And then how do we do this? And what is the rule on it?
Jamie, I'm not the person to ask. That's what you're here to figure out.
I guess
So,
we'll have to
good
get with
luck.
the Department of Law to figure that one out. I just don't want to violate, I don't want to discriminate. So I wasn't sure if you had an answer on that. Okay.
Right.
So if I may jump in, Jamie, it sounds like there are two issues. One, you want to know the legal parameters in terms of disbursement and equity or equality, or however you phrase that. And then I would say two, then the policy decisions of this body based on what that legal guidance is.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, because I don't want it to be, I've had complaints that they felt they were discriminated against because they didn't get some that other organizations did. And I said, well, did you apply? And they're like, well, I said, well, there you go. You got to apply too. But I just want to make sure that we bring that forward from the public, that they have to apply, but also that we as a body have to say, okay, well, you're an organization, you shouldn't get 500,000 and then someone else only gets 30. So I want to be very careful on how we do that this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. And I'll just check in with Mr. Gates. Dean, if you wanted to add anything to any legal considerations the body should have when we approach the discussion about dispersing funds.
I know I read something about this in the final rule from U.S. Treasury, but I'm not ready to comment right now. Thanks.
Thanks, Dean. Thank you, Jamie. Kevin?
Thank you. Just to make sure that we get through our agenda. So then, since our number one goal here is determine a process for which proposals will be considered at the May 26th work session, I imagine that we're going to be using, I think last week I saw the last one, we started creating an online application that you go through. And I guess if everybody reviewed and I took a look at it, I think what I'd like to see on that online application is, since we have some priorities here, particularly that were in the PowerPoint, if we could have like check boxes, like this applies to this area. So as individuals, so does it apply towards economic development? You have right off the hand, which one of these does it fall under? And then maybe under there you had subcategories. Okay, so that we can take our big goals and then we kind of like for lack of a better term, the Price is Right Plinko board to say, here's the categories. Because you may end up with a lot in one area. We end up with, let's say 75% of it being economic development, but not enough in housing and workforce or child support. Then we can kind of reallocate those based on, I guess our priorities as a board. So does anybody have any other ideas as far as what that process should look like? And then who reviews that? Are we going to set up another committee that does that? Who's going to chair that committee, et cetera?
Thanks, Kevin. I wanted to note too, and thanks for calling attention to the agenda and the goals of our meeting today. And I wanted to note number 4 on reviewing logistics. It's likely that there may be 100 to 200 submissions through the form stack, and those submissions will come directly to the Assembly email list and at regular intervals. And maybe Claire, you want to speak to this part about how we'll be provided with a master list.
Yeah, nice segue to the next part of the agenda. Hopefully you've seen some of them come in already. I think we've had about 5 come in, and that the form that you get, it's a email form, but it has all of their answers. And then I'm also getting an Excel spreadsheet that I can share. I just got one, so I can share it once a week. And there are check boxes for those categories that people are checking off. Some people might check multiple ones, so that's where I think it'll be the Assembly's job to figure out which category it most strongly fits with. And then I think as to the other parts that you mentioned, that will be covered in the next section on the agenda. And that really is for the Assembly to decide, do you want to give $5 million to each category? Do you want to just have a big picture? Anyhow, and so that's kind of what we'll get into in the next section.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Kevin. Next, I have Felix and then Cameron.
Thanks. So Claire, you said that we should be getting some of these already in our email. What does that look like?
It's the form stack form when you get people who want to sign up for phone testimony or written testimony, and you get those directed. What's that?
So, okay, so it's a form stack. Sorry, I just want to go through this.
Okay, apparently
right
you're
now.
not getting them.
Yeah, that's why I'm going through this exercise, because.
Okay,
I'm a little
I will
concerned.
work on that with IT to make sure that you're getting them.
Thanks. Okay, so then I guess not having it in our email yet, can you just give us a round number? How many proposals have been submitted so far?
There have been 7 proposals submitted. The smallest one is 25,000 and the largest one is for $1 million. The average is about 300,000 or 400,000.
So I guess what makes you confident that we're likely going to receive 100 to 200 plus?
I was just thinking that that's how many, that's about how many groups got funded in the last round of ARPA. And I imagine that most of the applications will come in on Friday when it's due, since it's a very simple application, but most of these groups want to do it right. So I've been fielding at least one question a day from different groups that are planning to apply.
Okay.
It'd be great if it was, well, I don't know if it'd be good or bad if it was less. It'd be easier for you all to deal with if it's less.
Yeah, so I have a few more just logistical stuff. So are we asking folks who did prior proposals like months ago because they were nervous that we would fund everything before they even knew that the money was available? Are we asking them to do this in the new format, the folks who?
Okay. And that's I have contacted, there was about 5 or 6 groups that have been contacting us this spring. So I emailed them all individually and made sure they knew about the application.
Okay. And then can you just tell us a little bit about the outreach that's been done so far?
Let's see. We did a press release, and then I emailed a handful of staff at the Foraker group. I emailed Ken Miller, who's in the room, who works with a lot of nonprofits and helps them with their applications. And I emailed the Rasmussen Foundation. We created a social media post that's been put on the clerk's page that I'm pretty sure Foraker group has shared. And then I know that I think several Assembly members have also done their own outreach, and please continue to do that because I've had a couple of calls from people who've had questions based on that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks, Felix. Cameron?
Oh, wait. I also emailed the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce and the Chugaki-Lorver Chamber of Commerce.
Actually, before we go to Cameron, Jamie, you wanted to comment on, yep, go ahead.
I have some concerns about the Eagle River Chamber of Commerce receiving ARPA funds. Is that what you were talking about?
I emailed them to ask them to spread the word to groups in Eagle River, businesses and
Okay.
groups in Eagle River.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Cameron.
Sure. In the application, you said there are check boxes. Are there limitations so that, for instance, they would only be able to, let me just back up for a second and then I'll ask my question. It appears to me, based on this sheet, that the equal distribution could likely be equal between the four major buckets, and that the guiding principles are issues that need to be sort of addressed in each proposal. Does it address need, geography, alignment, so on? And I guess the question is, it would be really helpful if in the application they were in some ways forced to only choose one of the four. I mean, they may see it as crossing over into multiple areas, but what is the primary area that it is addressing? That would really help to organize it for us, because they're the ones that are asking for the money. So that's one idea. Is it forcing them to say which primarily does this address? And then the other piece, and again, I don't know if we can do this at this point, but I would just really love them to address how they are addressing each one of the six guiding principles, even if it was a sentence. But at this point, is it only check boxes like, are you addressing this or not? Is there any narrative, or is there any sort of requirement that they, again, pick one of the four, and whether they are addressing the specific six principles so that we can see how well it fits those?
It is only those four check boxes, and they can click multiple. I went back and forth between what you're describing and allowing them to pick multiple, because I remember at the last work session, some of you said it might be a favorable thing if they did multiple. And I felt that there's different enough that it'd be hard for a lot of projects to really stretch themselves and say they're housing and child and family support. Some of them will cover those, but I think some of them will only catch one. And then Shelley has the application pulled up, and I do have the one question at a little further down. So she's showing you the priority areas. And then I have, how does your project meet the Assembly's guiding principles?
Okay.
I wanted to keep the application really simple, because I was hearing from a lot of you that you wanted it to go to a wide range of groups and not just the ones that have 3 development people on staff and can do these things quickly. So I was trying to keep it as simple as possible.
Okay, great. And just one other comment, and then I'll pass it on to the next person. I really do feel like that in terms of the equal distribution, that initially looking at equally distributing among the funding priority areas would be a positive place to start, and to look at addressing the guiding principles in terms of assessing whether the project is viable or not. And then I think once we go through that process, going back and looking at, is there geographic disparity? Is there lack of alignment? That's a piece that we're at, because I think if you start with, we have to make sure we hit every neighborhood, I think you're going to drive yourself nuts, because there are going to be projects that are going to be widespread, right? And there are going to be ones that are very specific to an area. So in terms of a process, I would just advocate for equalness among the priorities, checking off whether they do address the guiding principles, and then seeing where we land at that point, and then going back and looking at gaps. Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron. So next is Kevin, and then Austin.
Yeah, just building off your statement, Cameron, because you made some good points. I guess the way I would see it happen is that as individuals make the requests, or excuse me, as organizations make the requests through individuals, then those, we would see whose districts those primarily lie within. And our job is, I would see my job as the assembly person to contact those if there's any questions and help give clarifications. And maybe I can give assembly person notes, say, hey, listen, I talked to them, I got better clarification. You know, maybe they'll fill out the form as good as someone else, but maybe they have a very viable project. If we have 200 applications and there's 11 of us, that's 18 apiece if you divide it up. But then you may have some that are of a more general nature, in which case I think that once we go through them, it'd be nice to have a, you know, like you say, your master list, and then we may end up just tallying them up and having to contact individuals. I think some people will be really clear on their applications and we won't need to call them. But I think if there's any that we are scratching our head about, I think just picking up the phone, having a conversation, and the ability of us to make notes will clarify that pretty quickly.
Thanks, Kevin. I just would add to, it would be best to go through the official contact and not assembly member to assembly member, since Open Meetings Act, we want to be careful. But we could also do that though through Claire or Shelley or Dean if there's a specific question. Sometimes it's hard to know if two other people have already contacted them.
Well, and until you get the applications, you don't know what questions you have anyway. So
Right. Thank you for raising that point. Next is Austin and then Randy.
Thanks, Suzanne. I think I just want to agree with some of the stuff that Cameron said, which is we probably should be focusing on the priorities and then seeing how that shakes out in districts. The reason I'm saying that is, you know, West Anchorage might have fewer people impacted or less of a need than Midtown. And I want it to be what the need is versus where it is. But obviously we have to balance that because we want all folks in the municipality to receive the benefit of what these funds can do. So anyway, I think we'll have to figure out how to balance that. I like the application and appreciate Claire doing that. I think the narrative is important because, you know, obviously, this is health workforce. I think it should say healthy. Oh, someone already said that. Okay. I think that you could definitely, fit in multiple funding priority categories. So appreciate you doing that. And then I wanted to challenge us and me too, to be thinking about this is a big amount of money. So we can either pursue the route we did before, which is finding a bunch of need in the community, and those are legitimate needs. Or we as the assembly could, say we could invest $20 million in some sort of workforce project that would allow people to be here in the summer and throughout the year and have affordable place to live. We could do something big, or we could do a lot of smaller, but still, cumulatively a big impact. So I'm really trying to think about what are those projects that are big and long lasting, because this is really a unique opportunity to have this funding. So I think that's it for now.
Thanks, Austin. And I just want to note too, and I think it's fine, we're blending into some of these other agenda items with discussing big picture questions and also the decision-making process, which I think is fine. We can have that fluidity. So next is Randy, and then Jamie, and then Cameron.
Thanks, Suzanne. So I liked some of the ideas that Austin brought up. So again, I think ways to look at it should be equitable across the districts, or some projects that might fall into one district are for the whole of the city. But I definitely agree with we should really focus on those who need it the most. So make sure that affluent areas that weren't hurt that much really probably don't need help. And then the other piece on going by the priorities, I would make the suggestion that we see where the totals come in for each priority, and then we can see how that balances out. Because that's, in a way, that's a straw poll by the citizens saying, hey, we really need child and family support if that's where 90% of them come in at, and if maybe where most of our funds should go. Thanks.
Thanks, Randy. And I just want to note too, because I didn't point this out, but probably you've all noticed on the back of the agenda, there are resources and the web address for the U.S. Department of Treasury overview and a summary of eligible uses and so on. Okay, next is Jamie and then Cameron.
Thank you, Suzanne. So I just, before I lose my train of thought on it, Randy had mentioned affluent neighbors and neighborhoods or individuals. And I just want to be really careful with that, because even though you might live in a nice house, doesn't mean they weren't on the brink of losing it, because they may have lost their job. So I just want to make sure we don't always know what's going on behind closed doors. And I don't want to discriminate against someone based on income either. The one other thing is that I understand what you're saying, Austin. And one of my concerns is that it was brought up in my community council. I never really, I didn't look at it this way. But last night when they brought it up at Eagle River Community Council, 16% of the population belongs in Eagle River, of the total mass of the municipality. Out of that 16%, Eagle Rivers gets goods and services of 4%. So we give in 16%. We receive back from the budget services about 4% is what they were calculating. We have our own Parks and Rec, and we also have our own Subursa. So if we look at what the mayor brought forward, and we're talking about making sure the overall MOA is taken care of, there's a lot of things in here that actually go over the entire MOA. One of them was the $2.5 million for the APD, because they have so many vehicles that have over 200,000 miles on them, they have to get new vehicles. One of the other ones was Felix's favorite, is the transportation mode. We don't have allocated funds, and we haven't for a couple administrations allocating fuel. And if we don't have funds for that, the transportation, the buses aren't going to run. So those are two of the top priorities that I wanted to bring up. But when you do look at the proposal from the mayor's office, it kind of disperses everywhere right across the entire the MOA. So I really, really want to focus on, because I can't remember the exact amount, but when we did ARPA funds last time, I think Eagle River was just barely over $1 million. And that wasn't fair. That wasn't even equitable. And not to take a shot at Aunt Brandy's district, but you guys did get a really nice medical facility. Yeah, over $5 million. So I just want to make sure that we really step back and think about how the districts need money too, for their needs and their economy. And we are part of the MOA, Chugach Eagle River is, but we are clearly a different city, that we absolutely have different needs. So thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Cameron, and then I put myself in the queue.
Thanks. Just one of the things as we're moving forward, we probably need to be thinking about our language and that we're using the same language. Equitable is not equal, right? And so equitable is based on need and is often not fair in many people's minds, but it's done because there's an intentional use of funds based on an analysis of need. And we can have different opinions about what that need is and argue about it, but that's, I just want to make sure we're being clear that equitable distribution of funding is often not distributed equally intentionally. Second, just wanted to highlight a couple of things. One is that we haven't really identified on this long-term versus short-term in terms of, what is an immediate need that needs to be addressed with this funding versus upstream investments. And this is sort of, I think, where Austin was going. And it would be nice to have that conversation as part of the process as well. What are the immediate things we need to invest in now because it's of high need, and what are smart investments that are going to really help our community to recover and continue to be stronger and stronger. When we did this the last time, we had a number of economists come in and talk to us about investing in businesses, particularly small businesses, and we asked them, do you have any guidance for us? How should we make some of these choices? And they said to us in a very blunt way that there are some small and medium-sized businesses that are not going to make it. And if you give them the money, you're going to be giving the money to an organization that won't be around. There are other organizations that money is really going to allow them to survive and continue and move forward. And so that's a difficult conversation to have, and it's a difficult thing to analyze. But I think part of it is smart investments and thinking about how to leverage the money so that it really is put invested in a smart way. So that long-term versus short-term conversation, I think, is helpful for us to have. And then the last one is the reason I'm advocating for forcing people to pick a box is because it's all economic development. if I clicked any of the other three, I would also click economic development. And so I think that that it's going to be hard because there would likely be a sense of, if I click more boxes, maybe I have a better proposal. Anyway, just something to think about, that I think it's easy to distribute or distinguish between housing, for instance, and health. But I think my guess is we're going to have a lot of economic development boxes clicked. Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron. Felix?
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. So I guess just echoing some of the comments that have been made. Last time that last year when we talked about the ARPA 1 funds, we discussed a lot about how we can spend the $51 million in any one of the, back then, I think it was like 6 or 7 different priority areas for last year's ARPA 1 funds. And we likely wouldn't be able to meet 100% of the need if we spent all of the money in one of the priority areas. So, as we look at figuring out how to distribute the money in all of the different priority areas, I really do think that we need to think smart, and we need to think long term, because we even said it here in the vision, right? Successful proposals should provide long term investments and be transparent and equitable. And I think we are shifting away from sort of I think what a lot of experts told us with CARES and sort of partly into ARPA 1 funds, which was the survival mode, and now to recovery and hopefully, getting us to a thriving mode. So the more that we can think about these ARPA 2 funds, especially because they're going to be likely the last batch of federal funds that we get, the more that we can think about them in that frame, I think the better. And part of this work is also going to be, we're going to see where the chips fall when we get all of the applications, right? I mean, it's hard for us, unless there are members who are actively bringing their own applications forward of their own accord, which we've had every single time. But otherwise, we're going to see where the applications fall, and maybe a lot of the applications fall in child and family support. But then it's going to be incumbent on us to really sort of make the hard decisions of where we decide to allocate the money, just based off where we know our economy is and where we want to be in the long term. And then I guess last, just going to one of the comments that Jamie made about the fuel costs, I'm not necessarily opposed to funding some of the fuel costs, but it does bring up one of the things that we haven't necessarily talked about, which is how we're going to go through the mayor's proposal. Because I do think at some point we are going to have to go through that and decide, yes, these are good things to fund and include, and no, these are not, and make that distinction.
Thanks, Felix. Okay, I had put myself in the queue just for a couple comments, and I really appreciate the points that everyone's been raising in this discussion. Real quick, though, just on the Gerdwood Health Center, which was funded with CARES Act money, I appreciate that it was, it's in my district, District 6, and I tend to view that, though, as an item that didn't just serve the residents of Gerdwood, but bigger interests. But fair point. Maybe other members see that with their items in their districts as well. Geography is not such an important issue to me, and I'm just echoing what other members have said too, with taking more of a need-based view, and that some of the need may be concentrated more in certain areas. And I like the idea of considering doing something big, especially since we are, as Felix pointed out, in this place where, okay, there's ARPA funds and federal monies coming in, also the infrastructure money as well. And at the end of the day, I guess it's still, it's hard to know even where the state budget will land, but we're expecting the municipality for the first time in years may get community assistance funds. And there may be more money coming into the municipality
than there has been in years, especially like if the school bond debt reimbursement, if that passes, then that's effectively property tax relief. And so we're in a very, very unusual situation where I think the municipality is looking at funds available that hasn't been seen in years. And so that said, I think taking some extra time to look at a larger project and not necessarily taking up the entire 52 million, but taking some time to look at a larger project that can't be funded with all these, with these other streams, I think is worth doing. And we may end up setting aside a certain amount for some of these smaller individual ones as well. Okay, anyone else? Kevin?
Just as a point of curiosity, what do we, Cameron made some good points about whether it's short-term or long-term investment. I guess, what is that definition? Would you guys agree with? It would be short-term something that's just an impact of 12 months or less or 24 months or less, and anything past 24 would be longer. I'd like to know, when we say short-term versus long-term, what is the date and how do we differentiate between the two? When do we step over that line? And there was another point, but I just spaced it, so I apologize. We'll just stick with that one for now.
Thanks, Kevin. Jamie?
Thank you, Suzanne. So to kind of answer Kevin, so for me, short term would be the Eagle River Food Pantry, right? That's immediate. We need that action. Prices have gone up. Food expires. A long term would be Station 33, $2 million. They have issues going on with our fire department. The other thing I wanted to comment, Suzanne, and I appreciate your words about we don't want to, because of the geography of everything, but it's clear that APD, we have 3 police officers on one shift. So during a 24-hour period, we have 12 police officers. So Eagle River only has 3 officers on duty at any one time. And that's a population of about 47,000 people. And then when you look at the municipality, you look at, I don't know what their police officers, but I think we're 50,000 or 50 shy. So let's just say 500 police officers on duty. And if you subtract 3, Anchorage has all the remaining for the other 250,000 population. So that's what I was meaning about, hey, we're out here, we're not getting the same services and we're getting less. And that's why I was talking about being fair. That's all. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thanks, Jamie. That would be an interesting conversation probably with the chief. Just no?
We don't have crime like you guys, but we pay a lot more.
All right, so we will go ahead then, and we've talked about some of these big picture questions. I'll just go over these questions, and if anyone wants, to add, and then my hope is that we'll have some conversation about how we want to handle making these decisions and where we want to go next. So under the big picture questions, we had identified what is the Assembly's spending goal, fund as many organizations as possible, concentrate funding in a few big impact projects. We've had some conversation about this. But then how do we narrow down projects to meet our goal to do as much good in our community as possible? We also had some points raised, and Claire or Shelley, one of you took some notes on some of these points as well too. So we can come back to those points that have been raised. And then once projects are selected, how do we determine funding levels for each project? So, go ahead, Austin.
Sure. And Suzanne and Claire and Shelley and I brainstormed a little bit about this earlier just to kind of get organized for today. So I have the benefit of having thought about it during that process. So we kicked around, maybe you guys are going to present on this, but a couple ideas of how, and I think they have more ideas of how we could do this process. For me, I think speaking to the actual selection, I think it's really important that we don't, I hope, all come with, these are my 10 things, and let's just try to split them up, because I worry that we will get lobbied by those who are politically connected to make I want to be one of your 10. I really want this project. And we feel pressured. And so I really want us to just come and take, with the eligibility, if Shelley is comfortable, take all the applications, tell us which she believes are eligible and which she believes are not. And we could still, argue if we think they are, but just so we have that framework. And then from there, go through our goals and priorities as a group and see which applications meet them and why. And I think we should do the same thing with the mayor's proposals. And then then we'll have a list and then we'll try to figure out how to narrow it down. But to me, that feels like a good process. I don't know, be interested in feedback.
Thanks, Austin. I want to point out too that we haven't directly talked about assembly member proposals. And I know that's one thing Kevin and Randy, you had asked about as well. How do we handle those that assembly members want to take forward? Where does it fit, in that process, especially if we do an initial screening for eligibility? We do want to avoid, or at least I would like to avoid, on June 6th, everybody, showing up with a bunch of new proposals that we, need to deal with on the floor. So thanks, Austin, for suggesting that approach, screening for eligibility, and then as a group, evaluating, am I summarizing correctly, evaluating how those proposals meet or overlay with the framework and the funding priorities and guiding principles. Okay, we'll go around the queue. Kevin?
Yeah, and actually, Austin, yeah, very, very excellent point. And so I think for me, as going through this meeting now, I think kind of answered our own questions in this, so that I would probably just direct anybody. Listen, I'm not going to be asking for money. If there's areas within my district or areas that are close to me, I'm going to direct those individuals to the website to fill out the application. Once it's done, it goes through. I imagine there'll be another point where we'll be able to add assembly member comments regarding this item. Does it meet our goals, and does it rise or does it fall based on the merits of the total number of applications and the funds available? And we'll just have to work together on that. So I think I got clarification through this process. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Randy. Or thanks, Kevin. Randy, your turn.
We do look similar.
I know. I like sitting next to him.
So I had a question. If you can pull the form back up, I think you kind of addressed it so down a little bit. So what I was thinking is, someone asked for $300,000 to build a house, but we're not going to give them $300,000, but we'll give them 50. But at that point, it's fruitless, right? I can't build a house for 50. So is that kind of what the minimum funding is supposed to answer? Like, hey, you're not going to get everything, but hey, you can do something with this, or it's pointless to give you anything, all or nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Go ahead, Cameron.
So
ahead, Cameron.
in my real life, I run an organization where we do a lot of granting, and this comes up a lot because people submit a project and they ask for a certain amount of money, and we're not going to give them that full amount, and so we don't know whether half that, whether that the project's dead or not, or whether that's going to even matter or not. And so I do think that there is a part of our process that's actually reaching back out to those and gathering more information about what the viability of that project is, or that sort of thing. So I think once we get to a narrowing, that would be a really, and that could be very labor intensive. So we want to put that, once we've narrowed it down and identified projects that meet our criteria and that feel like a priority, but we have limited funds. And at that point, we can develop a list of those projects or those requests and then gather more information.
Thanks, Cameron. And Randy's giving a thumbs up. I was going to ask you if you had any follow-up, but okay, good. Anyone else? So go ahead, Claire.
I just have one thought to pose to the group. If there are indeed 200 applications, it would be impossible to spend, it'd be like 10 hours to give 5 minutes to each one. So I think today should be spent having a little bit of that discussion first, so you have an ability to narrow down the list at the next work session. But I don't know, I was thinking, what if you discussed child and family support is broad? Do you have a vision for what you mean by that? Building a daycare center, giving out grants to child cares, creating a child care trust. Maybe if you had that discussion and kind of got down to a little bit more of what you mean by those categories. And I'm looking at the two process people, Felix and Cameron, just so that when you see a project on a big list, that then you kind of have a better indication if that fits in your vision or not.
Thanks, Claire. And Randy, go ahead, and then we can look at the process people.
Yeah, so just to comment on that, what I've seen done in the past is, again, you get all the projects in, you total up each category, and then you just do a ratio versus the funds that are given, draw a line. You're either above the line or you're below the line. And you'd have some discretion to pluck things out if you needed to, but that's one way to look at it. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Anyone else?
I'll add a little
Cameron?
bit. Yeah, I appreciate the question, because I think that they are broad categories, and I don't think we have a common definition for what we mean, or have identified really sort of the type of programs or the type of projects that are a priority for us. I don't know if that's going to be something that we're going to be able to do or not prior to evaluating the projects. I think that will likely come out as a part of the process. Once we start to see the different projects, it will help us to go, okay, I really have more of a preference towards this kind of thing over this kind of thing. So I think ideally we would have that figured out and have a screening tool to be able to narrow it. But my guess is with 11 members, we're probably gonna figure that out through the process. So
I'll go to Shelley, and then Jamie, and then Kevin. Oh, Felix.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were
Thanks.
next, and then Jamie, and then Kevin.
Yeah, I agree with Cameron, and I guess just echoing, one of the comments I made earlier is, there's two ways this is done, at least based on the last two tranches we got, right? We either see where the chips fall when we get the applications, and then we sort of make the tough decisions from there, or assembly members can be more proactive, and if they have a particular vision and they really want something to be done, then they go and seek an organization to put in an application, and and then they lobby for that with the group. So there are two different ways to do it, and in the end, I think one of the things that's it's going to be difficult for us is that we aren't necessarily sort of subject matter experts in any of these particular areas. So as we think about what is a true long-term investment that makes sense for our community and our economy, considering where we are right now, I do think, it might make sense for us to, as we've done in the past, sort of go back and say, okay, we're thinking about these things, and as we think about how we appropriate these dollars, what actually makes sense for us to do, and maybe what should we stay away from? Because I think there are some things where we do want to stay away from. I've heard members talk about maybe we should stay away from sort of doing the business grants that we've done in the past, because that's sort of our thing that we've done, and now we're looking at what's in the future. So I think having someone who can provide some of that expertise of what does it look like for the future would be helpful.
Thanks, Cameron. And Shelley, did you want to comment before on what Cameron had said, or in terms of, or? Okay, and then we'll go to Jamie and Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. Just real quick to talk about thinking big, because if we do want to think big, we need to consider it beforehand, because it could really divide up how we spend the dollars. And so I think it's something you need to think about over the next couple weeks. There are some projects that could actually help other things. One of the big conversations around the Navigation Center has been, great, but where are you going to find those personnel? We need healthcare training in this community. Where are we going to get those workers? We need affordable housing. We need childcare facilities. We can do all kinds of big things. So, one thing the municipality has that I know a whole lot about is land. So, Elizabeth Place, we put up the land for a 40-year note at 1%, and CHA built Elizabeth Place, 38 low-income units, 12 no-income restriction. They filled up immediately. They've stayed full. We could do a project like that. Sean Debenham's market rent, 48 market rate apartments, cost about 11.6 million now, nearly doubled in cost over the last year. Not great, but that's the economy these days in building. Innovation and Training Center, I've heard you're probably going to get a proposal for something big like this. Like I said, childcare, I was waiting on a number from Cook Inlet Native Head Start to see what their facility just cost them. Somebody may know. I'm like, Jason's my go-to. He has no idea. But they just built the 17,000 square foot facility with 32 infant slots and expanded their half day into full day. We can think big like this and still have half of it left over, probably. So, that's something that you may want to make a decision on before you divvy up everything. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks, Shelley. Jamie?
Thank you, Suzanne. One of the samples was that how are some of the things in our Trothers districts impactful to the rest of the MOA? And as so that everybody says, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. It's there. Well, here, then we could give the explanation. So for example, one of them is there's the 501(c)(3) out in Eagle River, and they do all the softball diamonds. And everybody in the entire state actually comes down and plays there. And they're really great fields. And then everybody in the MOA, all the high schoolers, all the softball girls, they all compete out there. That's something that obviously they're asking for funds, but that's an example of, even though it's located in Chugiak, Eagle River, it actually dispersed and helped everybody throughout the MOA. So that was just an example of how we could spread it, like you're saying, like the overall picture Shelley was talking about. If you think a little bit bigger, how does it impact everybody? So, but that's an example. The Starner Bridge, for example, yeah, that's out in Eagle River, but there's safety issues and it's infrastructure. So those are some things that I'm going to bring forward. So I don't want people just thinking I'm narrowing it down to frivolous items. These are things that really are going to help muni-wide too. It just happens to be located out there. Thanks.
Thanks, Jamie. Kevin?
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of our questions will be answered once we just start analyzing the requests. Because we're going to have to be a little malleable. We can't be too rigid in these categories, understanding that some of the areas merge together, or it may come under one category, but under closer scrutiny, realize it actually falls more under another. I mean, you could argue that let's just take an example. Like, let's say we clean up around the Sullivan Arena since it's coming down, and we make the needed repairs to Mulcahy Stadium, and then we clean Chester Creek. Is that child and family support, because now more child and family are kind of participating and they can use the trails more and they're not scared? Or is that economic development? Maybe it falls in both. But I think that when we, as a collective effort, start closer scrutinizing these, that'll be the biggest challenge that we have, is analyzing these and making sure that we have enough time to do so. I guess that's my biggest concern. I'll have to refamiliarize myself on those dates, when they're supposed to be in, how many weeks do we have to go through those? Because if we are trying to cram 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag, then we're not going to come out with a good product on the other side.
Yesterday. We won yesterday.
Yeah, well, there you go.
I can speak to that. The application deadline is next Friday, the 20th, and then you're meeting on the 26th because it's Memorial Day weekend, so you didn't want to meet on Friday, so you're meeting on Thursday. Shelley and I have committed, I think, whatever, Monday the 22nd or whatever that is, that we're going to sit down and really dedicate that day. I think hearing from you, going through the spreadsheet, making sure everything's in the right category. Maybe we just take the guess of which category it should go in, get rid of the ones, or mark the ones that we think are ineligible, and then add up the totals and have that to you hopefully by Tuesday. But then you meet on Thursday, so it's quick based on the timeline you all discussed last time.
And then just after that, I have to have the AR prepared. So it's pretty quick.
And just to follow up with that, this is more of a statement than a question. You know, obviously, both Jamie and I are passionate about our district. However, when we vote on things on the assembly, we make decisions that affect other districts. Sometimes, you know, more heavy-handedly than it does ours, and that we have a responsibility for the greater of Anchorage on those matters where we've maybe negatively affected other areas. So we have a responsibility to see that those things are taken care of. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Austin?
Thanks, everyone. I think that your plan, Claire, sounds great to sort of summarize things, get everything to us. I don't actually need to see all the things come in through FormStack. That honestly sounds a little overwhelming depending on how many we get, but what'd you say? Yeah, Jamie's saying maybe just the finished list. So however you want to do it, it's fine, but that'd be good to have a couple days. I was just wondering if the body, Felix has a thought on that. If the body, what you all's opinions about how to, you know, say one of us has an idea like Shelley brought up or any idea that an outside entity is not going to submit. How and when do we bring that? I mean, it's probably helpful to bring it and discuss it at the 26th, knowing, I think you mentioned this, Suzanne, you know, any member could bring something before it's adopted, but how do we try to make that 26th date most useful? And then Shelley said an AR is needed probably Friday to get on the regular agenda, that Friday for June 7th. But last time we decided, maybe that's what you're saying, Jamie, that we would do in some ways a placeholder, so include some stuff, but be able to make changes. Anyway, just throwing that all out there in terms of the process.
Actually,
You were gonna bring, I think you were going to check with Dean about bringing kind of an introductory one that gets introduced pretty soon. So we should probably be working on that. And then it would just kind of have the body of your vision and the overall statement. And then,
That's true for the 24th.
yeah, I think that's due today, huh? And then after that meeting, then you could put in the individual items.
Dean?
Yeah, thank you. I think I heard mention that items for the June 7th meeting would be due on the 27th. And actually, because of the Memorial holiday, the clerk has a note they're due at noon on the 26th. So, not to throw a wrench in everything, but
About the placeholder. I think you might have missed that part because that's kind of key. Or I can't.
a placeholder could be submitted. Also, that's regular agenda deadline. You could actually submit this for the addendum the following week. So there's a little time there, but I imagine with something of such wide interest that it's good to have a placeholder.
Well, I guess I think I'm flexible. The priority is to make sure we get it out there in the public. I'd like to present these goals, our process, sort of how we're going to make determinations, and that could all be in that, you know, draft. So as long as you all commit to getting it introduced on the 24th in some way and sharing it with us, I'm fine with however that happens. I don't know if others are, but anyway, there are other comments too. So.
Thanks, Austin. Before I go to Felix, I'm going to go to Pete and then Felix and Jamie.
Thanks, Suzanne. I was just thinking that there may be groups out there that would like to get a grant, and they're going to reach out to assembly members and hope that we would submit the request for them, thinking that we might have a bit better chance of getting that passed than if they had just submitted it on their own. I just happened to think of that, and so, and I don't think that would be a problem because if they didn't apply for a grant earlier, they have not seen the form and are not familiar with the process, and so they might assume that we're more familiar with it or more on top of the situation, and so we might anticipate getting some of his calls like that.
Thanks, Pete. Felix?
Yeah, I was just making that comment. With all of the boundless and endless staff that we have, let's do all of the applications for everyone. Strike that from the record. Okay, so so I guess going on Pete's point before I go to what I wanted to say, hopefully someone is reaching out to organizations that are sort of emailing us with their sort of spreadsheets of stuff. Like, for example, last week, we got a spreadsheet from Visit Anchorage of they had a lot of requests. They're not going to get them all funded. But, and so are we asking Visit Anchorage to, thanks for that. Now, can you submit it online via the portal? Right. So I just want to make sure that we're following through on those. And then the comments that I wanted to make was, on timeline, I understand that there are still things that we're finessing, but once those are finessed, it would be helpful if the timeline could be sent to the full assembly so that we can get a better sense of sort of what to expect when. And then for me, I think contrary to some of the other members, I do want to see the applications when they roll in real time. Because for me, it gives me more time to process these things. Because I don't want to process or think about 200 applications in the middle of a meeting that could potentially take who knows how long to actually sift through all of that information. And then when we do get, once the deadline is reached, I think it's important that whatever we get, that we are able to sort through that information in a way that's easiest for us. So for some, it might be costs. They want to see the different proposals sorted by their cost. They want to see the different proposals sorted by priority. And they want to see the different proposals sorted by when they got them to the assembly. So I think it's important to sort of give members that flexibility to see what's sort of important to them. Thanks.
Thanks, Felix. And just Claire, to follow up on Felix's question about reaching out, and you had mentioned you've been doing that with organizations that contact us.
Yeah, I think another group did the same thing where maybe not to everyone, but just to me, a laundry list of which one. And I've just been telling I have told people they can submit multiple ones if they have really different projects, because you don't have to accept them all. So I think that's probably what I'll tell Visit Anchorage is pick the one or two that you think are best. And
Great. Thanks, Claire. Kevin?
Yeah, a couple things. One is when the applications come in, whose desk do they hit first? Is there a way to make sure they're completed before they get farmed off to us or before we start evaluating them? I mean, first, I want to make sure I'm dealing with completed applications. And the second part of that, and so that's a question, is just under further thought. I think as much as I would love to help individuals, I don't know how appropriate it is that I fill out an application. You might say this in an application or resume for them. I think I would just revert them back to, if this is something you really want, you can fill out this online form. I don't want to be putting words in your mouth. And I want to be careful about not making representations based on my interpretation of why you're doing it. That should be in your own words. So I'd be hesitant to fill out that out for anybody. I think just directing them to his website is good practice for the assembly. But is there a way to just make sure the applications are complete before that we don't end up with a bunch of that are half done, or we got to go back? Like, we don't look at them and maybe it's understood unless these are completed. You know what I mean? Follow up before we start bringing into work sessions, and then we look at a bunch of incompleted applications.
yeah, so far they have all been completed. I mean, there's maybe 4 or 5 questions and everyone has answered each one. I guess if someone were to fill it out and submit it by accident, I could get rid of that for you. So you didn't see it, but I think they'll all be complete by the time they get in, because it's not like there's a bunch of attachments and budgets that they have to come up with. I think I heard you say earlier that if an assembly member really wants a project or likes something, then it would be on you to find a group that could do it and encourage them to apply.
Go ahead, Austin.
Just so I understand, Claire, you're not suggesting that assembly members can't bring projects. Okay.
No, I was just repeating what someone had said earlier, that they thought that if one of you had a good idea, then it's probably on you to find a group that can carry it out and talk to them about it and encourage them to apply. But I suppose you could fill it out yourselves if you wanted to.
Well, some of them might be muni projects, right? So I think that's where it's a little tough, like some of the things Shelley was mentioning. So,
Right, that's a good point.
Right.
Yeah,
Some
okay.
of them might require an RFP or an RFI. Yeah. Or they might be a P3.
Before I go to Cameron, I want to note that Christopher Constant is on the line. Cameron?
Yeah, just wanted to add to the conversations happening now that, and this may be just for new members, there's absolutely nothing wrong with meeting with people who are bringing proposals forward and learning more about them. I think in many cases that's really helpful because as we go through the list, you can provide more information and more context for that. And so I think the word lobbying was used earlier. I think it's okay for us to meet with different groups and gather more information and have a richer understanding of what these projects are, so that when they come forward, we can add to that, whether we're, advocating for them or not. But and then I just really appreciate the comment about if there's something, there's a need that you see in the community. I've found this to be true often, that going to organizations and saying, by the way, this funding is here, you may not know about it. And, if you want to develop a proposal, I would encourage you to. I think that's really important as well. You'd be surprised how many people don't even know that this funding is available and that this process is going on. So the more we can reach out to people and make sure that they're aware of it and encourage people to bring projects forward, I think the better.
Thanks, Cameron. And just to turn to Shelley and Claire, in terms of muni projects, I assume then that list that we received that was submitted as an AR, will you be adding that manually then to the spreadsheet?
How would you all like us to handle it?
Sure, go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you. Shelley, can you tell me what your role in this is? Because I'm in the dark a little bit. Can you tell me what your actual role in this is? Because you're suggesting things that I'm like, I don't know if that's a disclosure issue or a conflict of interest issue, or I'm concerned. Can you tell me what your role is?
I'll speak to that first. Shelley is a part of the Assembly Council Department, and so is assisting in doing research on behalf of Dean and on behalf of members and projects that are approved through Dean. And in this instance, researching eligibility and offering expertise in terms of policy research and analysis, and her own knowledge too from being involved in the municipality and land use issues.
I just want to make sure that there's a non-disclosure, and I want to make sure that any comments that are made, that are very, very careful of what's released when you work for a different department or for the administration.
So I think that would be a question to Dean, or if Dean, if you want to comment or provide a response to Jamie's concerns.
I'm not really clear on what the concern was about non-disclosure. Sure, no. I would mention though, sure, but I would mention though that we were talking about big projects, and Shelley's presentation had a few examples, and those are just to give you ideas of what would be eligible big projects, and the actual final results we have, whatever big projects that would come from you guys. So this is just giving examples of what might be eligible from her perspective.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Jamie. Chris?
Thank you. I, for one, appreciate the fact that the administration unceremoniously let her go, and we found the opportunity to bring her on board. Shelley, I'm glad you're here. And you speak for a number of us in your efforts, and there is no conflict in government process. There is no confidentiality secrecy agreement that you signed. And I'm hopeful that the work you do helps us to dig deeper into these potentially large and land use impacting projects. And if there's any perception of a conflict, a member may on a specific item, always bring that up, and it's up to the body to make the call. Innuendo is never helpful.
Thank you, Chris. Austin?
Oh, I was just going to say that, we're all the Muni and we can work collaboratively. And I hope we can with the mayor's office too, to do projects that the city needs. And I just view, your role or any of our roles as contributing to this greater pile of ideas that we can hopefully, whether it's today or someday down the road, implement. So anyway, I'm just excited that we're all thinking about this stuff and appreciate you all being here.
Thanks, Austin. That's a great segue back to the original question that Claire had asked about how would the group like to see those municipal projects included in that spreadsheet. I call it the spreadsheet that you'll be pulling together with the form stack applications. Anybody have specific thoughts? Kevin?
Well, I guess it sounds like you're just going to put them into Excel spreadsheet with, I guess we would want to come up. I don't want to be overly, I think you should limit it down to like 4 or 5 different categories. Name of the project, amount of money, what category does it fall under? Is it short-term or long-term? And I guess what would be those simplified categories? And we just keep them in an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe it's from the most amount of money to the least. It'd be nice to see how much funds we have available and then where we're at. Like, you know what I mean? How far we are over and like, what are the requests? Running total of requests and amount done. It kind of tributes down and go, well, we got people asking for $20 million more than what we have. And so it's like, okay. And then if it's just shared on a Google Drive, or I don't know, however we do it, where we can't edit it, but we can just go in and view it. And that way it's a live link, or basically an interactive link where you can go in and see. I guess that would be it. We just have to decide on what those 6 categories we would be. That way we don't end up with something that rolls off my screen. I got to scroll 3 pages over to get all the information.
Yeah, I think what you're saying sounds similar to what we've been thinking. So we'll work to come up with a spreadsheet that's as easy for you to use as possible. And I think Shelley might already have the administration's project in a spreadsheet.
I do. I just don't have it broken down by your 4 funding priorities, but I can do that easily.
Yeah, and it can just have a description, which is if you want more information, you click on it and it takes you to the full description, maybe, or application. Click on it and it takes you to the individual's application. But we can see them all, click on application and just like bullet points. Thank you.
Okay, I've got 3 more people in the queue. I just want to note, I'm excited to see us fully utilize Excel, and I'm looking forward to pivoting this data. Okay. Randy, then Chris, then Austin.
So question on the Excel file to Kevin's point, is it going to be accessible? Can we go to answer Felix's piece? Can I go look at it anytime I want to constantly refresh myself?
I think I will figure out how to get the applications to come to your emails, because that was a request by a couple different members who wanted, like Felix wanted to look at them as they come in. And then the spreadsheet, I have to ask IT for it. So I got one today that I'll send out to you, and then we'll figure out a regular interval to send that.
So those emails, and I haven't seen the one that come to us. Will they have a similar header or something, so then I can set up a rule to dump them into a folder, and that way I know where to go get them?
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Chris?
I think for the public's benefit, it might be wise that we establish just a place where the ARPA updates have been going, where that spreadsheet can live in an updated manner, just to let people know what we are also reviewing, so that it's not kind of a serial meeting behind the scenes. And at the same time, I had a request by kind of a department, but kind of a special project, a downtown library, for some funding for a bond failed project that we had. And what I suggested to them was that they, as a member of the administration, also enter the information into the website. I don't know necessarily that assembly members should do that or would have to, but I think that any projects that are proposed might actually benefit from going through the same screening process. And so I just want to put that out there, that that's one possibility, is that we just have to have, by the 22nd, all of us putting our projects through that filter.
Thanks, Chris. And Claire, it looked like you maybe wanted to comment on the piece about making the applications or the data available.
Yeah, I'd figured there would be a Open Meetings Act public records requirement to have it public in some way. So I'll work with Dean and figure out the best way to do that.
Okay, great. Thanks. Austin?
Dean would know best, of course, but I'm thinking just having the list there probably is fine. But it's more that if we're using it to communicate with each other, right, that could be problematic. So, but anyway, you all will figure that out. Kind of going on what Chris was saying, I'm thinking through the administration's proposal, and without having them submit all of those, some of them are self-explanatory, I think, right? Some might say money for a capital project, and we go, okay, we're familiar with that project. We can figure out how it fits into our guiding principles. What are these four called? Guiding principles or goals? Do we know? Priorities. Okay, priorities. I'm going to try to use the right word. So, for instance, one of the last items on the administration's list was a Sand Lake water improvement. It's $4.5 million or something project. So I've worked, on a bunch of Sand Lake stuff, water stuff for a while. I think Cameron and I, a couple administrations ago, were trying to figure out how to levy upon connection and not completion and all that, Anyway, so I emailed AWU and said, what is this? There's no information about it, right? It's a 2-line thing, and that's fine because it's in an AR. And we had to go back and forth quite a bit for me to understand even what the project was, let alone whether it fit into our priorities. And so I'm concerned that if we just take the mayor's list, that you all won't, and we all won't know how to put it in our priorities. And so, yeah, I guess I'm thinking now, maybe it makes sense for someone from the administration to go through the exercise that's in our application for the projects, but there are a lot of them. So anyway, I don't know how to work that, but I don't think we'll be able to evaluate them alongside the other projects using our priorities without knowing more. Maybe they need to send a paragraph about each of them and the need, because they must know the need if they put it in there. But I think we need more information by the 26th to be able to weigh those. What? Yeah, but I think we just need more information, and it might make some of them more compelling, but yeah, I just don't know enough about them. So.
Okay, I think Shelley and I could probably work with the administration on that, and maybe we could give them a hand if you've already got some sort of a spreadsheet going and they could just add to it. But yeah, I think a lot of those ones, you don't know if it's an urgent need or they're like, oh, if there's extra money, we'd take it. So yeah.
Well, and they did that before we set this, right? So they didn't know, oh, these are the priorities, and they didn't have an opportunity yet to tell us how it fits those. So I want to give them that opportunity.
I'll put that on our to-do list to follow up with them.
Thanks, Austin. So we have a little bit less than half an hour left, and I just want to go back and look at our goals for this meeting and see if we've accomplished them. And then if members want to add as we go, that's fine. Okay, so our first goal, determine the process for which proposals will be considered at the May 26th work session. Some of the points, and I'll just summarize a little what I have, and maybe Shelley and Claire, you can jump in with your notes, and anyone else. Okay, so for that process, everyone is good with an initial screening for eligibility. Yes, okay. And Shelley will do that based on what you shared and with Claire and Dean as well. And then we will go through as a group to look at how the proposals that are eligible meet those priorities and guiding principles. We may need to go back at some point in the process, and maybe that's after the May 26th work session or before, I'm not sure, to requesters to ask follow-up questions. What's that, Cameron?
Yeah, I have a question. You're walking through this. Did we agree on this? Is this partly what you're doing now? Is like, do we agree? Do we vote on this or to make this document?
We did not vote on that yet.
Okay. The reason I'm asking in particular is just so when we go through the process, we can go back to go, okay, guys, we agreed on this, right? So that's probably how helpful. And one thing in particular, and Felix pointed this out, in the vision, it clearly says successful proposals should provide long-term investments and be transparent and equitable. That's a pretty big statement. That's what we're saying that they should do. And so just want to make sure that we're all in agreement on that. And if we are, that's awesome. But it might be helpful to just verify that before we move forward.
Thanks, Cameron. That's a great point. And I know that, Claire, you had initially shared this summary of essentially this summarizes where we left off at our last work session. And
I was just thinking that every word in that document should go into the AR that we're putting together for the addendum next week, so then it can officially be voted on.
yeah, and it almost seems like too, we're moving as quickly, I think, as we can, but also helpful even to have it as a separate AR. I think, Felix, didn't we do that last time? We approved the framework. Do you remember, as an AR separately?
It was all together.
It was all together.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, great. So we'll have that all together for there. Okay. So, and I had left off with, we'll go back as part of this evaluation process at some point, either before or after, to requesters to get follow-up questions. There's some other smaller things, such as sending the timeline to the full assembly. That would be prior to our meeting on the 26th. And we addressed how those muni projects will be added. Claire and Shelley will go back to the administration to get additional information. Documents will be posted online in one place. And then as far as individual members bringing forward ideas, I heard some consensus for encouraging people to input ideas, folks who aren't on the assembly, on the form, to submit them through the form stack. However, I think Austin too, you noted that members can still bring projects forward right up until the point where it's approved. We prefer not to, but I know that this happened last time because sometimes projects get surfaced late and are critically important. Is there anything else in terms of the discussion about determining the process for which proposals will be considered at the May 26th work session that need to be added? Go ahead, Austin.
Sorry that I have another one. I'm just thinking back to the introduction that Shelley gave and the comments Jason gave around revenue replacement. Will you all be, I can't remember if that was in the mayor's proposal and how much there was, and I don't know that we have the information to calculate that. Is that something you could work with on, or make sure that could you all think about that before? Okay, great, thanks.
Jamie, is your hand up? Oh, no. Okay. Okay.
She's plotting.
Thanks, Austin.
I'll
Kevin?
I'm plotting.
I just realized I may have been sending the wrong link. I was sending one to the state. So where do I find the exact application? I was like, hey, wait a second. This is for the Department of Commerce.
Yes, doesn't
Make sure, I want to make sure I'm sending people the right link for the
Yeah,
application.
their
Where do I find
application's closed on April 20th, I think.
that?
It is on the homepage. It's a long link, so I don't want to read it out, but it's right on our homepage
All right.
of the
It's on the
assembly.
assembly homepage.
Oh,
Redirect.
great.
I just probably sent a bunch of people to some salacious website, and I'm doing what I'm doing over here. I swear my fingers.
Oh,
are
if you
like
can find a
hot
way to get
dogs.
extra money.
Hot dogs. Like,
Felix, are we devolving too quickly? I see
Right.
that look over there.
I will also send out the press release. I'll resend that because it has all of what you put in, the link.
I like that idea.
Okay, and the timeline.
You
It's
gotta-
got it all in one document.
you need to make it scratch and sniff simple for me.
I can't make it scratch and sniff. but I
Okay.
can make it
See,
simple.
this is what
Yeah. Thank you.
this is what happens when we use first names.
Yeah, it is. I love it. That's my favorite part
rubbing them together.
Okay, so are
That's
we,
Amy. That's Debosky. All the time.
don't make me use the gavel. Okay, folks, so are we good on that first one? Determining the process for which proposals will be considered at the May 26th work session? Yes, okay, I'm seeing. That second one, determine proposal selection process to use at the May 26th work session. I think that one will be harder. You know, we talked about just even with categories, how we define those. There's going to be quite a bit of variation. And I'll just add too, for me, I'm looking forward to what members of the community will bring forward and holding out that, oh, maybe that's something I hadn't considered, you know, as far as a family support or important for economic recovery. But does anyone want to add anything as far as that selection process? Shelley or Claire? Sorry,
Just two more thoughts for you to think about before that work session. I guess I just have one concern. It's not a big one, but to be aware of that you could get to the point where you leave that work session, and what if ever all the submittals add up to 50 million? You're like, perfect, let's do it, and then but you're still not accomplishing your goal. So somehow we need to have a way to look at everything that you've selected and say, yeah, these are huge, impactful, and meet all of the goals that we described. Because you could, if you just look at, when you just look at what's right in front of you, sometimes you miss other things. So just making sure we have that built into the process. And the other thing to think about is whether you want to look at the funding levels in your initial selection, or if you want to pick projects first and then go back and look at how much money each project should get. So that's two things to think about for the 26th.
thanks, Claire. Randy?
So maybe a silly question, but let's say we go through and that total does not add up to the amount, and it's 25 million. Then rather than just push money out, can we set that 25 aside and say, hey, or the next patch aside, so let's do it again. Try to get better projects. Yeah. Nod and smile. Okay. Thanks.
Felix?
Thanks. So we don't have the meeting on the 26th so on our calendar yet, but I do just want to advise you to save a lot of time, please. I don't want us to rush.
To do what now? What did you?
When you send out the invite, just make sure that it's allotted a lot of time.
A lot of time.
Yes. A lot of.
A lot of time.
What do you mean by a lot?
Yeah.
We
this
have
is that,
4
like-
hours. We are doing 4 hours at this point. I think 10 to 2.
If we get 200 applications, 4 hours is not going to be long enough.
Just as long as you're the ones asking for the 6-hour work session, not me.
This is Felix Rivera, and I am asking for a 6-hour work session.
And Jamie seconds.
I second that.
Okay.
And while we can't vote in a work session, I appreciate the support. And actually, could we get on the record a show of hands here? How many agree with Felix on maybe more than 4 hours? No. Okay. In all seriousness, yeah. Okay. So we may need to. Okay. Okay. So we'll definitely need to make sure that we have ample time and some buffer time. So we may need to start earlier or be prepared to go later or be prepared to cancel your Memorial Day plans and just. Claire, do you feel like you got feedback then on the questions you had raised?
Yeah, I think we're actually coming up with pretty good clarity for the 26th.
Okay. Austin?
Okay. I was wondering if it would be helpful. We're probably going to get more proposals, right, for all of these things than money. So would it be helpful for us to have experts there? And I don't know how you pick those people. And so that would be the challenge. But for instance, child and family support, would it be useful to have a couple people who work in that field who we could say, Jamie's saying maybe not, and I think probably because it's hard to know who to pick. But yeah, the facilitators are going to be there, right? So we've got that. Okay, Jamie's thinking facilitator. I'm just, since you're not on
Yeah.
the mic, I'm saying she thinks facilitators are enough. Felix has comments too. So
Yeah, so I mean, I already said this earlier in the meeting that
Oh,
we should
sorry.
have. It's okay, y'all don't pay attention to me half the
Yes,
time.
I do.
So that we should bring subject matter experts to the meeting, and I think those subject matter experts shouldn't necessarily be sort of groups who might apply. They should be systems level folks.
Mhm.
So for child and family support, that would be
Stephanie.
Thread,
Mhm.
because they're likely not going to apply for any of the funds. For housing, maybe we bring AHFC or any other groups. So I think we can think about some of those sort of system level folks who can provide that subject matter expertise.
Yeah, it feels like it would be really helpful to have that feedback or just ability of someone in that field to brainstorm with us.
Okay. Yep.
I agree with Felix.
So Claire, do you want members to send suggestions to you?
Yeah, I think that works.
Okay, great. So noted the two recommendations that have already been made, Thread and AHFC. And then if members have ideas for subject matter experts who'd be helpful to have at that work session, send those names to Claire. Okay, anything else for the proposal selection process? Shelley, did you have anything to add? I know your focus has been more on the eligibility piece, but also broader engagement with process issues.
I think the only question that we didn't bring up, if we do have a ton of projects that we get there and there's 200 projects left that are eligible, Claire and I did discuss the option of, possibly a quick round of thumbs up, thumbs down, maybe by a super majority. There may just be projects that nobody wants. So just something to consider.
Thanks, Shelley. Randy?
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna be as bad as we all think. I mean, if we
You don't want to do
Okay,
it. You don't
I'm-
want to round robin.
naive, right? But if my thought process, if we come in and do our homework beforehand, there's going to be above the line we're all going to agree upon, they're going to go forward. There's going to be below the line we don't agree upon, they're not going to go forward. It's that middle tranche that I'm hoping is not too large that we'll have the debate over.
Thanks, Randy. Appreciate the optimism. Dean, did you want to add anything?
Well, I would just caution that because of how we define work sessions, that you don't want to take votes and stuff during the work session. You could do it in a comedy meeting. I think you could get a sense for things, like what Randy said. Anybody object to these, and nobody objects to that proposal. It's like, oh, it's above the threshold. But if somebody does, then you put it in that debatable area. So rather than a thumbs up and thumbs down from around the room, I don't know. I just want to be careful how we do this.
Thanks, Dean. So we'll give some more consideration as to how we'll move forward with indicating support for proposals. Oh, sorry. Portia, go ahead. Sure. Can you come up and grab a microphone? Either way, which if you...
So Portia Erickson at the mayor's office and introducing Ken Miller, our ARPA contractor. So Ken, I'll let you go ahead and speak first.
All right, thank you for the opportunity, Assembly and Madam Chair. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we understand, and a little difference from the first tranche of money, is that there are specific reporting requirements that need to be indicated and or stood up before the release of the second, because we did run into some problems. And it's not a fault of anyone on the assembly or a fault of the mayor's office. The federal government, in all their wisdom, did to make some changes, as we call. They had interim final ruling, then they had the final ruling, which came out in February. And in that ruling, there were some changes that were brought apart. But a couple of things I want to bring to your attention when you think about some of the funding levels that you're going to allocate to these nonprofits and for-profit entities. Number one, all entities that receive funding over $750,000 in a fiscal year will have a single audit, period. Okay? And that means it could be federal funding from any source that equals up to 3/4. There are 16 entities that have that at this point. They do not know that they need a single audit, but it also depends, and we will go back and find out if they have spent or expended that amount of money in their fiscal year. Number one. Number two, any entity under $50,000 does not have to report. We can aggregate that, and we will report back and have reported back. Number three, there will, and you may want to look at, and I'll have Portia maybe speak to this more, funding for support of the admin. And what I mean by the administration and management of the grant is, I'm not going to say onerous, but it's a lot. At this point, we have 90 plus subrecipients. You're looking to add another 100 to possibly 200, depending on what your funding levels are and how many you choose. There are at least 5 reports due each year. There are quarterly expenditure reports, and then there is what we call performance reports. Then there is usually a closeout report that's also due and will be due. This is over the next 2 years, and there's a lot of work that goes into doing those reports, to say the least. The other thing is that please understand that we are not using DUNS numbers anymore. I did send a message to allow us to, when we stand up or when we ask for the request for fundings, that they will start using what is called the unique entity identifier. That is mandatory per April 4th federal rules and regulations. So that needs to be, they're not using the tax ID, they're not using the DUNS number anymore and will not use it anymore. And then the last thing is that every nonprofit, every entity has to fall under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1965, and they have to fall under the 10% admin rule. The reason I bring this up is I always like them to know this up front. One of the things that we would like to do is that as soon as the funding is released and or stood up, the program, we will have training for all the recipients so they understand up front, because some of them did not understand that they would have to continue to report, and or believing that they had finished the funding, that they had used up all their funding, they did not need to report anymore. That is not true. They still have to report to the federal government, because we have to report back of all the subrecipients and awardees of this grant. Other than that, it's a great program, and we enjoy the opportunity to support our community. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the information. And Chris has a question. Mr. Constant?
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Suzanne. Here's what I would love to have, if you can, as soon as possibility, provide for us in writing these guidance that you're mentioning and any other potential changes or restrictions that the administration believes apply, so we can review them.
Yes, that can be provided and will be provided.
Thanks, Chris. Kevin?
One last thought on the application, since we're wrapping up here. And forgive me, I remember I looked at it the first day you sent it and browsed. Is it important, or is this not important to be able for that the petitioners be able to upload a couple photos if there's something important? I guess my thought is, let's say it's a campground that has experienced some damage or whatever it is in their bathrooms that are used by, or what I'm just looking at it. They can say, I'm trying to give you an idea of the severity of the issue, and it's hard to put it into a sentence. Is there a process that they could submit photographs if they think that that's relevant, maybe just limited to 3 or 4?
Yep, I put it on there where they can upload a document, and I think I kept the page limit to 3 or something so that we didn't have pages and pages to go through.
Thanks, Kevin. Portia?
Good afternoon, everyone. A couple of things that I just want to echo as we're just continuing to go through this process. One, when we were discussing subject matter experts, one of the things I think that might be helpful is if we look back at the original ARPA first tranche of individuals that received funding, to maybe even have some of them come in as experts. So Mr. Rivera mentioned Thread, which had received funding, but I just want to make sure there's no overlap. For example, the state of Alaska, and I've been trying to get more information, has about $30 million to help with child care assistance, and it's been funneled into public assistance, right? And I've asked, well, is there any way that the municipality can get some of those funds to help? Because not only with helping with, child care, right, or summer camps, there's also just helping parents to catch back up from the last 2 years of child care that they haven't been able to pay. And so they're no longer going to be able to actually go back to their providers and put their child in that child until they make those payments, right? And so I just think there's other entities. I've also heard from Cook Inlet Lending and Cook Inlet Housing that there's going to be a large tranche that the state of Alaska is going to receive for small businesses. And so just as we're looking at if we are going to still work with Cook Inlet Lending Center or Cook Inlet Housing, just to make sure that some of the funding that's coming from the state doesn't also impact what we're giving to the city, or maybe just make sure they're not the same projects. So I just wanted to echo that and see if there's any way that we could use some of those individuals as subject matter experts too, because they have received the funding, they have worked on other projects, and they may also be looking at to state funding too. So thank you.
Thanks, Portia. Anything else from members? Jamie?
Yeah, I'm wondering, Claire, if that Kevin just said it, maybe we can make sure, ask them, are you receiving any other grants? Because if they're already receiving, let's just give an example, $20,000, and then they're going to get more, but the $20,000 would suffice. That's good. We want to be able to spread those funds evenly. And then if you don't mind, if I could make a quick comment to Ken, thank you. Wow, thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming on board. You enlightened me a lot with what you said. And Portia, from the time last year till now, thank you. You came on board boom, speed demon fast. So we're all still doing it too, but thank you. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Jamie. Yes, we do very much.
Oh, thank you. Just one last comment on the administrative costs, because I know I just want to thank the assembly members for at the last assembly meeting accepting the funding to help with some of that from the first tranche. But the mayor's office is prepared to continue with this process. We continue to have the relationship with Ken as a contractor. So I hope that you guys will find that value in the work that we're going to continue to do. And again, we're very grateful to have Ken as his help. So thanks.
Thank you, Portia. And I just wanted to make a comment too regarding the different funding streams. And that was something that really came up quite a bit in our conversations about CARES Act funding. And then again, to some extent with the first tranche, was where is that intersection of what's available at the state level and those programs. And so I think that's really helpful and appreciate you raising that point, Portia. Any other comments or questions? Actually, I'm sorry, Chris, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks. Something that Kevin said kind of brought up an idea. I don't know if we've discussed this, but maybe we also consider, we can take photos and kind of statements about the gravity of certain proposals. And this might be a little painful for some of the organizations, but maybe we consider also doing interviews with organizations that we're working towards supporting, probably not with, if we have subgrants, like small funding pools for individuals, like we did for small business grants where there were 100 grantees that got $5,000 or whatever. But the larger projects that might be going to third parties, maybe we also consider doing interviews where we very briefly and very expeditiously hear from them directly.
Thanks, Chris. Kevin?
I think that's a good idea. We just got to agree on what that limit would be. If it's over $100,000, there needs to be over 150. As long as we have a threshold that once you hit this amount, there's going to be a more intensive interview. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. Anyone else have anything to add? Okay, I just want to note before we go, and thank you both, Ken and Portia, that the goal for the May 26th work session on the bottom of today's agenda right now is to leave that meeting with a spreadsheet of projects that meet federal eligibility requirements, meet assembly vision and goals, and have broad assembly support. that can be drafted into an AR for debate and amendments at the June 7 Assembly meeting, recognizing that it is the will of the body to infuse more or less time into the process as needed. So thank you all for joining today. Appreciate your input and all your help and all the work, Shelley and Claire, you've been doing on this. And with that, we are adjourned. We've got a 2:30 tour at Covenant House next.